Golson wins, but is it a win-win situation for Florida State? Healthy Deshaun may mean really healthy odds for Clemson, and dark horses, under the radar players, and plenty of predictions all over the place. This is the ACC Breakdown, and this is our third week of talking ACC football, and guess what? We finally get to talk games on the field coming up just on Thursday night. We're just one day away, and then a full slate on Saturday. We go to our panel of experts. We've got Cam Underwood from State of the U. We've got Dan Rubin from BC Interruption, and also Ryan Kantor repping the Clemson Tigers. So I guess in this panel for this time, until we play some games, Ryan somewhat has bragging rights at this point from shaking the Southland. All right, before we get cranked up on our Atlantic preview, and want to let everyone know that if you want to check out our preview and predictions from the Coastal Division, check out our podcast and video podcast from last week. So, hey, before we start breaking down the Atlantic Division, I want to kick it to Cam since he didn't have a chance to chime in on the Coastal. Really want to get your take, Cam, on the Coastal Division, and what do you see ahead for the Canes and a possible pick from you?
The Coastal Division really has to start with Georgia Tech. They're the defending champions, and they have a great deal of talent. It's not 4- and 5-star talent, but it fits their system, and Paul Johnson is very good. Obviously running their system, and their defense is better than some people might think. The real key is their quarterback, Justin Thomas. He is the maestro of an orchestra conducting that offense, and he does not miss a note. He's an incredible player. He's not the best throwing quarterback in the world. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be a first-round draft pick in the NFL, but he definitely runs that system well. So you have to start with them. Next, the Miami Hurricanes. We could be champions at 11-1 or 10-2, or we could have another 6-7 kind of year. We have very good talent. We have the best quarterback in the ACC in Brad Kaya, and yes, I said that even in the face of having Ryan here from Clemson talking about Deshaun Watson a little bit later, but I'll take Brad Kaya over him, even as a freshman. So there's a lot of talent there. Duke, the team, not Duke Johnson, but Duke has been a very good team. As David Cutcliffe has brought them up, and usually it's just around and around and around. North Carolina, Virginia Tech is very, very solid, even though their offense might not be the greatest. Their defense is always amazing. So, there's going to be some heavy competition again. I don't know that we're going to have 5 teams at 4-4 like we saw last year in the Coastal. But, I do think that the quality of football over there from top to almost the bottom, even including Pittsburgh, who they have a smash mouth style, and they're going to fight every single week. So it's going to be a challenging division that I think is improving. And right now I'm looking at either Georgia Tech or Miami as the 2 teams that will be victorious, or one of those 2 teams will be the champion of the Coastal Division, as I sit here right now thinking about it.
When I think ACC Coastal Division, I think toss-up, but at the same time, Georgia Tech dominated to a certain extent last season, and it's funny to see in the last 10 years, despite the emergence of Miami and coming from the Big East to the ACC, Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech have won 9 of 10 division championships. I would have never guessed it. We'll see what happens this year. Miami was certainly the roster to contend. Georgia Tech with the best team by far on the field last year. All right, let's kick it to the Atlantic. We kick it with Ryan. Clemson, Florida State, according to Vegas, this is like a dead heat. Their odds for winning the division and the ACC are almost even. So run it down for us, Ryan. What do you think about this division race?
I think it's going to be one of the more interesting races in college football. Let me start from the bottom. So at the bottom you have 2 teams that really aren't very good. Wake Forest, they may get 1 ACC win, 2 if they're lucky. They're very young. They lost. They actually have the absolute fewest players returning from their 2-deep in all of college football. Only 37% of their 2-deep returns. So they're very young. They're going to be bad, but on a brighter note, they're young. They're getting better. They're well coached. So I see them as a team that has a pretty bright future. Above them, I have Syracuse. Syracuse gets to host Wake Forest, so that gives them the advantage in the standings. They're not quite as young, but they don't really have much of a bright future relative to Wake or really just in general. And then you start getting into some quality bowl teams. I have Boston College at 5. They're actually replacing quite a lot of talent. They only return 9 total starters. including a new quarterback and pretty much an entirely new offensive line. So their offense may take a step back, which they're so well coached they may still win 7 games because that's what they do. But I don't see this as a year where they're going to take a huge step forward and really improve drastically from what they've done in the past. Then number 4, NC State's looking very good. Jacoby Brissett is an excellent quarterback. Shadrack Thornton, very good running back. They returned 14 starters. If they were in the Coastal, they'd be a great threat to win the division. But unfortunately for them, they're not, and they're a pretty clear step below these next 3. Third place out of Louisville. They only returned 9 starters, but they're extremely well coached. They've proved they could play with a Florida State, who they nearly beat at home, Clemson, who they nearly beat on the road. Very good team. I see them as taking a tiny step back and still being just a little bit behind Clemson and Florida State. They also go to Florida State, which I don't see as a very winnable game for them. They go to Pitt, which is a pretty tough draw on the cross. Though, to be fair, almost anybody in the cross is going to be tough this year, as they're all very, very, very balanced. Number 2, this is where it gets really tough. Those first 5 are fairly standard to me. In the power rankings, I have Clemson as the second best team in the entire conference. However, in the projected standings, I have Florida State second in the Atlantic. They return very few in their 2 deep, 44%. That's 126th out of 128 of their 2 deep returns. So very, very inexperienced, one of the most inexperienced teams in the country. They're obviously talented enough to be excellent regardless. But they go to Clemson, and that's what I think flips my ranking from power rankings to projected standings. A road trip to Clemson gives advantage Clemson, and that's who I have winning the Atlantic Division. And for Clemson, they're very inexperienced on defense, but they have maybe the best defensive coordinator in the country with Brett Venables. What's going to be the huge X factor for them is they don't have much depth. Their offensive line is okay, but very thin. Their defensive line has some talent, but it's very young and very thin. Linebackers is also thin. They just can't afford injuries. And obviously, quarterback, they have the best quarterback in the ACC by far, but no one behind him. So if there's an injury to Watson, you go from talking about a 10-11 win team to 7-8 win team. So just not a lot of depth. If they could stay healthy, they certainly have the schedule and the talent to win the division and then the conference, but that remains to be seen.
Cam, with Ryan's delivery, that was a little bit understated if you missed it. He was talking about the best quarterback in the ACC by far, if you caught that right now. Okay, Cam, hang on. We'll get to you.
We're good.
All right, the thing I like about this race, in looking at the schedules before I kick it to Dan, I love this because you guys have probably heard me from time to time rant about schedules in these huge conferences that have 14 teams and only 8 games. But Florida State and Clemson play the exact 2 opponents in the other division, meaning it's an equal schedule. They both play Miami and Georgia Tech. I love that. They're on even ground, even though the winner of this game typically just wins the division outright. If it gets muddled up and NC State or somebody else jumps up and maybe wins some games, at least they're playing equal schedules. And as Ryan pointed out, Jacoby Brissett statistically was the most impressive dual-threat quarterback in the conference, 23 touchdowns, 5 picks, and also a menace on the ground as well. So, Dan, we'll kick it to you for a little look at the Atlantic.
Yeah, I agree with a couple of points that Ryan made in terms of the Atlantic Division, especially that this division is segmented. I mean, when you think of the Coastal Division, you think of how wide open it is, that a team can jump up and Pittsburgh can do it, or Duke can do it, or Miami can do it to challenge Georgia Tech. Virginia Tech is in the discussion. The Atlantic Division gets segmented very nicely in that Syracuse and Wake Forest are the clear-cut 2 worst teams. Boston College and NC State are in kind of their next tier. Louisville is lagging behind the top 2, Clemson and Florida State. The good thing about that is that it makes it really easy on us to at least predict it. The downside to it is that if you're a team and you're supposed to finish somewhere, it's also a really good indicator that you've had a really disappointing season. I wouldn't be surprised if a team like Florida State took a huge step back with the pieces that they had to replace if Everett Golson isn't the answer, if Sean McGuire can't come in, if he's not the answer. There's too many different variables on that team that can really open the door for Clemson, to run away with the division. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people who disagree that Clemson is one of the top 2 teams and probably a step ahead of Florida State right now. In terms of maybe the Florida State fans don't think that way, but the majority of us do. But then when you look at the rest of the division, I wouldn't be surprised to see Louisville jump up and maybe shock some people, maybe even finish with a worse overall record, but backdoor their way into either second or first place. And then you always have some teams that are going to be upset ready. I think Wake Forest is going to be very improved this year. There's no possible way that offense can be that bad again. It is just inconceivable to me that the offense, even if it gets marginally better, will be able to win a couple of more games. Boston College is always going to be a factor. They're tough. They know how to play teams. They're going to be completely different this year and revamped compared to the way they were last year. And last year they were completely revamped from the way they were the first year, which is kind of a backtrack on my part from saying, well, they're going to be run heavy and run first. We actually don't know from what I've been taking away from a couple of talks with a bunch of people around Boston College. So they're going to be a factor. And NC State, they get on a little bit of a roll. They could make some noise. So it looks like it's a little bit more segmented, and I don't think you're going to see anybody who disagrees with kind of the perception of the division. But at the same time, it's also going to be a lot easier to determine if a team didn't live up to its expectations.
Yeah, Dan, Wake Forest and Syracuse had statistically 2 of the worst offenses in the country. Syracuse brings back a quarterback in Terrell Hunt who threw 1 touchdown pass. Now, he was injured, but for him not to be challenged for the starting spot after throwing 1 touchdown and 4 picks in like 5 games tells us a lot. Wake Forest coming back with a freshman quarterback as well who gained a ton of valuable experience behind a deplorable offensive line. Cam, it all starts with Florida State. You're very familiar with the Seminoles and what they bring to the table. Let's start there, and you can work this division in whatever direction you'd like.
Yeah, that's obviously where I would start, being our traditional matchup. The cross division is with Florida State, our traditional rival. And I agree with what Dan said, that I think that they're primed to take a step back, and being national champions 2 years ago, being into the semifinals of the first college football playoff last year, saying that they're going to take a step back is not saying that they're going to be terrible, is not saying that they're going to be garbage. I'm an objective arbiter of the situation. However, they've lost Jameis Winston, who won them more than a couple games in both of his years playing for Florida State. They lose a ton of guys. It is one of their youngest teams in recent memory, very talented team, but not with game experience. So, seeing them step back to 2 or 3 losses is completely plausible. And I think that that's something that we're going to see. I do think that they're going to develop through the year. I do think that they're still going to be a tough out. Obviously, Jimbo Fisher runs a good program. They recruit at an elite level, top 2, top 3, even the top 1. I think they had the best class last year. So, they're going to be a talented team. Don't get me wrong. But I think that without Jameis covering some of the mistakes that he did the last couple of years, I think they're going to walk it back a little bit. That opens the door for Ryan's Clemson Tigers to step up and win that division. And Clemson is very talented. Deshaun Watson is a very solid number 2 quarterback in the ACC behind Brad Kaya. He is a very, very good player. I saw him play, but we're really talking about 1 great game and then a couple okay games, and then he got hurt. I'll take the freshman All-American over that. And I could be wrong, but as we sit here right now, a very talented player, 5-star athlete, deals in that offense. But that offense, we don't know what's going to happen. Chad Morris leaves to go coach SMU. And around Deshaun Watson, they lose a lot of starters on the offensive line, but they have arguably the most skill position talent in America. They have wide receivers for days. They lose a couple, but they bring in, 5-star recruit in Deion Kane, who played quarterback in high school, but he switched to receiver. Ray McLeod played running back in high school, but he's going to be a slot receiver at 5'9" and can absolutely fly. So I think that Clemson's going to put points on the board, and their defense is very good. I want to see what they do up front, obviously having lost 7 of their top 8 defensive linemen and 1 of their starting linebackers. I want to see what they do there. But Clemson should conceivably win the Atlantic. And then after that, I agree with everybody else. Louisville slots in right at number 3. They have 4 quarterbacks who are position players for the starting job, which is to say that Bobby Petrino did not name a starter, even though pretty much everybody expects it to be Reggie Bonifant. They do have some talent on offense, but it's very unproven, very inexperienced, so you don't know who's going to step up and replace a Devontae Parker, a Michael Lee Harris, or something like that to make those big plays. And even Harris coming on 3rd down and being that converter. to keep the chains moving. You don't know who that's going to be. So that's a question that I have about Louisville. Their defense is very good. They get Devontae Fields, who was previously at TCU. He was Big 12 Player of the Year or Defensive Player of the Year a couple of years ago before he got booted from there and bounced to a JUCO. But he's a supremely talented player. He's going to play on Sundays. So they reload up front, and I think their defense is going to be, very tough. Boston College, they play smash mouth, just like Dan said. And then, you slide down. NC State, Jacoby Brissett, as he goes, they go. And like you said, he's a dual-threat quarterback, ran for over 700 yards, threw for almost 3,000 yards last year, and he's going to make them a tough out. They have some good skill position players and a solid defense, but nothing spectacular. And then, obviously, Wake and Syracuse. I mean, those are losses. Those are wins waiting to happen for their opponents, and they're going to really, really struggle as you go through this season because they're just honestly not really talented. And that's just kind of the way it is. I see it.
So Cam throws the first salvo. It's Kaya versus Watson. We're going to have to track that throughout the season.
Let's go.
That's good stuff. Ryan, we'll kick it back to you. I'm interested in NC State and Louisville to see if either one of them can jump up. I think a lot of people are getting a little bit too out in front of themselves concerning the Wolfpack. Yeah, they did bounce back from a 3-win season 2 years ago. Dave Doran doing a nice job winning a bowl game over Central Florida. They win 8 games, but they also played a soft non-conference schedule, didn't play anyone out of conference. They've got a similar situation here where they're going to just, bam, 4-0 out of the gate before they play anybody tough. Louisville, Bobby Petrino built the program into a major power once. Can he do it again? He had pretty much what we expected out of a first season in the ACC, going 5-3 in the conference in their first go-around, but they don't appear to be ready quite yet to challenge Clemson and Florida State. But on a given Saturday, who knows? They do lose Devontae Parker and a pretty good load of talent to the NFL. And as I like to note from time to time, I think I've done this 3 weeks in a row, but it's got to be said until there's more action on the field. BC is the team that gave Florida State the best 2 games over the last 2 years. That's all there is to it. Okay, Ryan. It's yours to take in terms of I'm looking for possible dark horses and also guys that you are excited to see play, whether we already know about them or they're under the radar.
As far as players?
Yeah, just players, or you can kick it to any dark horses in regards to whether that's NC State or Louisville, any matchups that you really want to see that are going to decide this thing. I think we've got the one obvious one, and then anything else.
Yeah, I think Clemson's game at Louisville, normally I don't think I would be quite as concerned, but it comes week 3 without a bye week preceding it. It's a Thursday night game. Typically the ACC has done a good job giving teams a bye week prior to sending them on the road to play a Thursday night game. However, for some reason Clemson didn't get that advantage. They'll actually be going on the road on a short week, losing that also important day of practice on a short week as they travel to Kentucky. So I think that puts them in a challenging situation. They'll have played an FCS team and then a pretty underrated App State team. And then they play up there on a short week, relatively unproven. I think that's a bigger challenge than people want to say. We had a blogger panel on Shaking the Southland assess the likelihood that Clemson wins each individual game, and bloggers actually were no more confident in Clemson beating Louisville than they were at Florida State. So I think that's an upset alert there. I think it was about like 50, in the very low 50s, 50 percentiles for Clemson to win that one. So I think that's a tricky one. As far as breakout players, I think one name, at least for Clemson, that comes to mind, they're replacing so much on defense. One guy that they're going to have to rely on is Shaq Lawson. He'll take over for Vic Beasley. He had a lot of tackles for loss, and now he has to get lots of tackles for loss because they don't really have anyone proven who's going to do it. Another name to watch, Christian Wilkins is a true freshman out of Connecticut, and he was supposed to be a backup at defensive tackle, but DJ Reader has taken a leave of absence from the team, so he's immediately thrown into a starting position, which is far, far from ideal. So he's kind of an X factor. Will he just take over and play great? He's a very highly rated freshman. If he struggles, we really have nothing behind him until DJ Reader returns and either slots behind him or takes the starting role back. Hey,
Dan, the national narrative is, of course, this is a one-game season. Florida State and Clemson carve through everyone, and they wait for that game against each other, and it's a said deal. Any possibility that anything different could happen? Is there any players that you're looking at across the board in the division that you're excited to see, or any other matchups?
Well, I don't think that Boston College is going to be the team that wins the Atlantic Division, but I think they're going to be the team that costs somebody the Atlantic Division. I look at those three matchups against Florida State on September 18th, at Clemson on October 17th, and at Louisville on October 24th. And every year, Boston College, like you said, is the team that gives somebody a hard time. They gave it to Florida State the last 2 years. I know they've given it to Clemson. The Louisville game last year was a disaster out of the quarterback position, but otherwise they played the team tight. BC does not typically lose games by a lot of scores, and I think that this year they're going to be a team to watch, and I say that out of my wicked Homer stance up here in the Northeast, but I say that with the...
Say Northeast again, Dan.
It's the Northeast
there
up here in New England in the greater Boston area. We got the Dazzler out at the on the coaching staff with Darius Wade at quarterback. I really think that this Boston College team is going to cost somebody the division. They're gonna, and I wouldn't be surprised to have it be Florida State either. They're a team that's been chomping at the bit to get back on the field, and we really don't know what to expect out of them. There's a lot of hesitation to pick them because of all the pieces that they've had to replace. They had to replace a quarterback. They had to replace an offensive line. They had to replace the majority of the secondary. But the people who they're bringing in, and there's a lot of freshmen on the depth chart, are guys that really are hungry and are in competition to play. Darius Wade, as I mentioned, at the quarterback position, he's a guy who is a much better passer than Tyler Murphy, which means that he's actually going to harken the offense back to those 2006 Florida days. I'm not comparing him to Tim Tebow. I'm comparing the scheme to those days where you're getting a little bit more read option pass, a little bit more straight-up passing. They actually apparently have wide receivers, and they actually can catch the ball. I know that is like mind-blowing to hear, but Boston College apparently they have a converted quarterback in Elijah Robinson, who's 6'2" and can catch the ball. Sherm Alston is going to play some wide receiver. He's really an interesting player. He's only 5'6", but does some amazing things in space. A couple guys got injured, but I wouldn't be shocked to see their names pop up at some point, especially as you get closer to the Clemson and Louisville games. Guys like Ben Glines, who was hurt during the preseason. And a name to really watch, I think, is going to be either Thad Smith or Charlie Callanan at the receiver position, because these are guys that are actually able to catch a football. And since they're able to do that with a guy who can actually throw a football, we know Steve Adazio likes getting weird with the offensive games plan. He's going to throw something at those teams that they're simply not ready for. And it's going to be exciting to see what happens, especially against Florida State, that third game of the year, after they played two FCS teams. You can catch Florida State napping on a Friday night, and hopefully later on in the year you think about Louisville, you think about Clemson, you think about Virginia Tech. If the schedule breaks the right way, Clemson plays BC between Georgia Tech and Miami. They could catch that team napping as well.
Dan, I never doubted your wide receiver play. Miami quarterbacks, Wisconsin offensive linemen, Boston College wide receivers. It goes right in that same category.
My mind was completely blown this week because I talked to a couple people. I talked to actually the play-by-play radio guy, John Meter-Perrell, who calls the games for Boston College, and he was really high on the passing game, and I was like, I was shocked. I've never heard anybody talk up the passing game before, but he's seen the team a lot more than I have this preseason, and he's really high on those receivers. So I don't even know what to do with myself right now.
Yeah, I think when Matt Ryan was there, they couldn't help but catch it. He just wedged it between their arm and their shoulder and just right in the armpit. They couldn't help but complete 65% of their passes. All right, Cam. Hey, you can take this in any direction you want. Players you want to see, handicap the race. What I'd like to get out of you guys as well, and Dan chimed in on this last week, how good is the ACC against the other Power 5 conferences, and is the ACC going to get into the college football playoff?
Okay. Talking about players that I want to see, I know that we were going back and forth about Brad Kaya and Deshaun Watson, but when Clemson comes down here, I'm excited to see Deshaun Watson play. I want to see him live and in person. honestly. He's a very talented player. I think very, very highly of him, and I think that he's electric, and I really do want to see him. At Florida State, I'm looking, because I do a lot of stuff over at State of the U about the recruiting side of things. I really want to see this Derwin James kid at safety, who is apparently a grown man at 18 years old. He's 6'2", like 215, 18 pounds, something like that. Massive guy, runs fast, hits hard, makes all of the plays. He supposedly is going to be integrated into the base defense very early. He's going to be making a lot of plays. So he's somebody that I want to look at. Obviously, Jacoby Brissett at the quarterback position, which, if you think about it, in the ACC on both sides, the quarterback play is really, really strong. You got Kai, you got Thomas at Georgia Tech. You have Deshaun Watson, obviously. You have, Jacoby Brissett here. Like I was talking about at North Carolina State. We have some of the better quarterbacks in America. So, across the board, I want to see that. And then, no, he plays on the coastal side of the division. So, just really looking. Oh, also for Clemson, the two guys I mentioned, the skilled guys, Deion Kane and Ray McLeod, I think that they could be integrated into the offense, and they're really special players when they're in space. So a bunch of guys over there that I want to see, the quarterbacks all around, and I think that that's something that we'll be able to see, throughout the year on the ACC network and regional games and things like that. As far as the ACC versus the rest of the country, honestly, the ACC conference is continuing to get better. On the coastal side, obviously, I think that Miami is getting better. We're not the 2001 team anymore, but we're not a terrible team like we were, and I think that we're actually even better than last year's record was. So they're getting better. Clemson, obviously, used to be a verb for messing things up, but I think that they're turning a corner, and like I said, probably the prohibitive favorites to win the division. Florida State, they're still up there. Bobby Petrino back at getting the magic at Louisville. Boston College plays teams tough. And they might surprise somebody like, we were talking about Dan earlier. Obviously, accepting Wake Forest and Syracuse because they're just tire fires. They're really not much redeemable. Hopefully, they can just start to build things together. The other teams in the conference are fairly strong. So I do think that we're one of the premier leagues in America, up with the SEC and the Pac-12. I think that we're up there in that top conversation for the best conferences around. And the thing with it, to get a team into the playoff, they have to be exceptional. There really can't be any missteps. So that really is a question in my mind of, is Clemson going to get into the playoff? And I don't know. I'm not going to say one way or the other. I think that's a tall task, even for that talented of a team. But for me, for this year with the ACC, if it's not Clemson, I don't think anybody gets into the playoff.
Hey, Cam, we got North Carolina, South Carolina. We got Auburn, Louisville. Interesting matchup there. Virginia, UCLA. I know people would discard that game, but the Cavaliers gave the Bruins fits at home last year. Ohio State, of course, Virginia Tech. But despite the Buckeyes winning the national championship, the Hokies, people forget, won that game. Any particular game that you're looking forward to this week, or anything that might surprise us?
Well, first of all those games are going to be great, and we have made it through the summer doldrums. This time tomorrow, we will be watching football, which is amazing and fantastic and wonderful and glorious. All those games, I think, are going to be good and being watched. I don't necessarily know that it's engaging if you're rooting for the North Carolina, South Carolina. Just for Steve Spurrier quotes after the game, I think that's going to be an engaging game, and the fact that North Carolina can score a lot of points. Virginia Tech, look, I need them to pull the magic off again. I am biased. I am very biased. I am a Hurricane, and behind me is the Big House University of Michigan Stadium because I'm a native of Detroit. So there's no school I hate more than the school where Urban Meyer coaches, and I hope Virginia Tech can pull it off, but I don't think so.
All right, Cam, whatever you're selling, I'm buying it. Cam joins us quite often and hits the podium, and, man, with that voice and that delivery, wow.
Hey,
it's awfully impressive.
Gift from my grandfather. What can I say? Thanks Bob.
Dan, whether it's the games this weekend or the college football playoff chances for the ACC, take it away.
Well, I'm just going to throw out that this is the closest Virginia's getting to that Rose Bowl all year. They're Whoever put them on that return matchup in their schedule, I know I said it last week. I'm just going to repeat myself and say that whoever did that to poor Mike London. He has to be such an angry coach over his non-conference schedule, and I think it's great for the fans. It's a way that if they get through that unscathed and they get through that, relatively speaking, all of a sudden they're a team to contend. But they're not getting much closer to the Rose Bowl than they are going to play UCLA. I know I'm speaking the obvious, and I'm going to throw out there the team that the game I'm most excited to watch is Syracuse and Rhode Island. Okay, no, it's not. Not even in the least. It's Ohio State and Virginia Tech. I'm pumped for that game. I'm really excited for Virginia Tech this year. I think it's a big game for the ACC. I think it's a huge game in terms of the conference profile. Again, Virginia Tech beat them last year before the season fell apart on them, so I am extremely excited just from an ACC standpoint. Normally I look at Virginia Tech and I kind of root against them. They're a little bit of a rival when it comes to Boston College, but it's a big game for the ACC. I think they have a very good chance with that defense to do something to the Ohio State offense. And if that happens, Ohio State fans, if Cardale Jones can't do it the right way, if the offense doesn't look the right way under one quarterback, it's going to start the murmurs nice and early on there. And I'm just really excited for that game.
A slight hit for my dark horse in the Coastal Division is Virginia Tech plays Louisville and NC State on the other side. No. They play two of the lesser teams on the other side. I haven't looked it up. I think BC's one of them, actually. Sorry, Dan. Miami and Georgia Tech have to play Clemson and Florida State. I think that evens out the division a little bit. All right, Ryan, college football playoff games you want to see this weekend?
Yeah, I think the game I'm most looking forward to, aside from the Clemson game, would be the UNC South Carolina game. Obviously, part of that's just that it's Thursday, and I'm anxious for some college football. But UNC returns 19 starters, and along with all those teams in the Coastal, I think they've got a very realistic shot to win it. Their defense was terrible last year, and they definitely had some culture problems as players had called out other players for not caring about winning. But they bring back a lot of talent that often should be good, and they bring in Gene Chizik. I'm very interested to see if they're finally going to live up to the hype that they seem to get every year, or if they're going to get trounced by South Carolina again and just be another mediocre team that gets embarrassed at the end of the year in a bowl game. Either way, it'll be fun, though. And then I also wanted to comment, you asked a little bit about where the ACC stacks up with other conferences. So I'll end with that and kind of throw it out. I think the SEC and the Pac-12 are clearly better, deeper, better conferences. So I won't debate that. But I do think the ACC is better than the Big 12, and I think you can make the argument that they're also better than the Big 10. I mean, the Big 10 has Ohio State, which is probably the best team in the country. I think they're rightfully number one. But after that's Michigan State, Wisconsin. Is that better than Florida State and Louisville? Who's really behind them? Are we talking about the Penn States of the world? Interested to hear what you guys think about how the ACC stacks up to the Big Ten. Obviously, they're behind the SEC Pac-12, but after that, I think it's more of a toss-up.
Well, I'm not going to go into a long dissertation, but I've got the ACC at number 4, but it's a very strong number 4. I think the Big 12 is the 5th Power 5 conference, and I don't even think it's close. The Big 12 is not very good. It's a 2-team league. Texas is horrific at this point unless they prove otherwise. Oklahoma has a chance to be better, but the ACC, I think, is very strong. And when I say close, I think it's a pretty well stacked, those four, the SEC, the Pac-12 number 2, and the Big 10 number 3, but I think it's extremely close between the Big 10 and the ACC.
Fair.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're going with that. I do think that I agree with Ryan that I would put the ACC above the Big 10 just because the top of the Big 10 is very good, and the rest is average to below. Michigan is rebuilding, clearly. Iowa is nobody's powerhouse. Nebraska's fairly decent. I mean, we play them for the back end of the home and home this year, but, I mean, they're not a world beater or anything, and I fully expect Miami to win that game this year. So if we're going, head-to-head, back and forth, as you go up and down, I mean, I think that we have more quality as we get into the middle tier of the ACC than does the Big 10. And I think that would be the separation. Plus the fact the top teams, the Clemsons, the Florida States, the Louisvilles, the Georgia Techs, and hopefully Miami, but I won't put us in that top. But the top 4 teams in the ACC, I mean, I would put up there as being better than the top 4 teams if you put all the numbers together. That's what I think.
Well, I could talk about this all night, but the point I will make is I think we're shortchanging a few teams in the Big Ten. Minnesota's been pretty good, 8-4 the last 2 years. Played well against non-conference competition. Maryland, defector from the ACC, no world beater, but they played pretty well. Rutgers, a team that got trashed in the Big Ten at 3-5, went out and beat a Pac-12 team. They beat an ACC team in the bowl game by 3 touchdowns after, again, 3-5 in the Big Ten and getting beat up by just anybody any good. Again, I think the ACC and the Big Ten is a great comparison, and I would not think anyone's illogical in debating for either side on that one. All right, gentlemen, it's been a good talk. The ACC will be able to talk football. We'll actually have games to talk about from the previous weekend, and we'll preview the next weekend's games. We got Cam Underwood from State of the U talking Miami football on SB Nation. Very proud. Dan Rubin from BC Interruption, of course, for the Boston College Eagles on SB Nation, and it's a trifecta from SB Nation with Ryan Kantor from Shaking the Southland. Gentlemen, this is a good talk. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
No problem. See you guys soon.